Welcome back to the IEA's podcast Everything Energy. I'm Dan Hewitt. This week, what's driving the surge in energy jobs? In recent years, the global jobs market has had to adapt to some big uncertainties, from the COVID shutdown to the inflation shock and the unavoidable questions raised by AI. But in recent years, the energy sector has held steady as an engine of jobs creation. Last year, it grew twice as fast as the overall economy and today employs over 75 million people. But does it have the skills to keep expanding as fast as it needs to? Why have there been reports of hiring bottlenecks? And what challenges could employment pose to energy security? Talking to me today are IEA analysts Rebecca Ruff and Elspeth Hathaway, two of the authors of the 2025 World Energy Employment Report. Okay, Elspeth and Rebecca, thanks so much for joining me today. Now, I want to start by asking why looking at employment data is important for the energy sector, because job figures can help answer some really big questions about the way that the world uses energy, or even helps us understand some of the big themes that we mentioned in the intro, like energy security.
Thanks for having us, Dan. Really delighted to be here today. Quite simply, there is no energy without workers, specifically skilled workers. So every time we tackle critical issues, whether it's energy security, energy affordability, or competitiveness, we really need to talk about the people that make this possible. And we're talking about a huge amount of people. We estimate there's 76 million people working in the energy sector. And that's different types of people doing different things, from those working on offshore oil rigs to construction workers building wind farms to individuals installing solar panels. So these people really are crucial to deliver our energy needs. And that's why here at the IEA, we'll look at the topic of energy employment with just as much attention as we would to other aspects of energy. And we don't do this alone. In fact, we work with a huge range of stakeholders, so policymakers, different governments around the world, but also energy companies, energy workers, educators and researchers, because we know the topic of energy skills and employment can't be tackled alone. So this report we're going to talk a little bit about today hopefully gives some insights into today's energy workforce and identify some actions that are needed to build this resilient pipeline of energy workers to produce the energy of tomorrow.
Yeah, so it's a really important reminder of how important people are to the energy sector.
Definitely.
Now let's turn to how energy has driven the jobs market. So Rebecca, maybe you could put into context for us how big a jobs creator the energy sector has been over recent years and today as well.
The energy sector is a major engine of employment. Today, about 1 in every 50 jobs worldwide is tied to the energy sector. At a time of economic uncertainty, energy has been really a bright spot. And since 2019, the sector has added more than 5 million jobs globally. And in 2024, jobs didn't just grow, they grew at nearly twice the pace of the economy overall. And that's not a one-off. For the third year in a row, global energy employment has outpaced job growth in the wider economy. And in some countries, energy has been a major driver of national job growth. For example, since 2022, the sector has accounted for 1 in 5 new jobs in China and 1 in 10 in the United States.
All right, so let's dig down into how those jobs are accounted for, because I think it'd be useful for people if they could understand the different ways that people can be employed when they're working within energy.
Sure. So the way we think about this is in terms of 4 broad sectors. We have fuel supply, the power sector, and grids. We have vehicle manufacturing and end uses such as energy efficiency. It is the power sector that is the largest energy employer, surpassing fuel supply as we move deeper into the age of electrification. And solar PV has been the principal driver, accounting for half of job additions in the electricity sector since 2019. But it's not just solar, though. Nuclear power, grids, and energy storage together make up roughly another quarter of new power sector jobs over that period. But energy employment has been growing across the board. Global demand is still rising, and oil and gas has recovered most of the job loss during 2020 as production capacity continued to expand.
Now, I think it's worth us thinking about what some of these jobs look like in the real world. So what types of jobs, what type of occupations are we talking about?
The energy sector is highly dependent on applied technical workers. That includes skilled tradespeople such as electricians, welders, grid line workers, but also technicians, plant operators, and assemblers. And together, these roles make over half the entire energy workforce, which is more than twice the share in the wider economy. And the big driver here is the construction boom in new energy projects, particularly in the power sector. Building grids, power plants, storage and charging infrastructure all depends on people with very hands-on technical skills. And most of these jobs require formal vocational training or advanced technical qualifications, which means you can't scale the workforce overnight.
So look, we know there's this growing demand for jobs in the energy sector, but of course there are concerns about a skills gap. So what do companies say is stopping them from finding the right people? What are the potential bottlenecks?
We actually collected really strong insights on this because the IEA surveyed more than 700 energy firms, trade unions, and educators, giving us a very grounded view on labor shortages and how skill needs are evolving. And what we heard was clear. Half of the energy companies surveyed said that they were already facing operational bottlenecks because of hiring difficulties. Skill shortages are driving up project costs, delaying critical energy projects, and stretching out lead times. Because these roles are both in shortest supply and in the highest demand, companies are adapting fast. Employers are making tough trade-offs, relaxing some qualification requirements, raising wages to attract talent, and leaning more heavily on on-the-job training to bridge the skills gap.
Now, there's also an issue about ageing populations. Maybe Elspeth, you could expand on that a bit.
Of course. So that's the other thing, Dan, we're hearing from companies is the issue of an ageing energy workforce. And you might think or say to me, well, why is that a problem? Because surely if you have older workers, maybe they're more experienced, they've got more skills. And of course, we want workers in this sector, a very crucial sector, to be well experienced and have high skill levels. However, we also need young people to come in to learn from these workers, to pass on this know-how and to replace these workers when they retire. And there are some concerns specifically in advanced economies where we estimate that for every new young entrant into the energy workforce, there are 2.4 workers nearing retirement age. And some sectors require specific attention. I'm thinking of grids, for example. We know that there's specifically a higher concentration of older to younger workers. And this is a sector where we really need skilled workers to deploy and maintain this critical energy infrastructure. And it's an issue that needs to be looked at and tackled. Otherwise, the problem will worsen in the future. We estimate that in 2035, for every 3 new entrants into the energy sector, 2 are simply replacing those who are retiring. So it's clear that we need to attract and train more people into the energy sector, something that we also go into in the report.
Okay, well, we've spoken about some of the bottlenecks, and let's think about some of the solutions. So what are some of the ways that governments and private companies, how can they train, retrain, or keep the right people? What are some of the solutions on offer?
I think it's a really important point because over the last decade, we've seen that the number of people entering the energy workforce with a relevant qualification isn't keeping pace with demand. And therefore, it's crucial to ensure an adequate supply of accessible and well-designed energy education and training. And I stress accessible because we've spoken to energy educators and what they've told us is there are major financial barriers preventing people from accessing education and training. And that can be high tuition fees, but it can also be lost wages during training time or lack of access to financial support. So this can be addressed by, for example, offering free or heavily subsidised education and training or via paid apprenticeships with energy companies. And I also think it's important to stress well-designed education because we know there are persistent mismatches between current education curricula and industry needs. So collaboration indeed between the education providers and industry is really crucial. And it's a bit concerning because less than 25% of companies that we surveyed currently engage with energy educators. So we know that there's some room for improvement there. But one last point that I'd like to make is that as well as making sure there's an adequate supply of energy education and training, and that it's accessible and well designed. The jobs also need to be attractive jobs for people to want to go into training in the first place.
Okay, well, let's pick up on that point of how you can make jobs attractive. Is that just to do with wages and finance, or are there broader questions that people can ask?
So to better understand, okay, what is a quality job in the energy sector, we actually just asked energy workers themselves, and we asked them, for you, what would be a criteria of decent work? And they came back with 3 things that they said were important. So fair wages, but also employment security and a safe working environment. So we made sure to highlight these in the report that was shared with policymakers, energy companies and other stakeholders. And we tried to identify a couple of tools that could potentially ensure that energy jobs were quality jobs. One example that we found of a useful tool was social dialogue. And this is when energy workers would sit down with energy companies, sometimes also with national governments, to talk about important topics like wages and working conditions, to try and find agreement on these topics to lead to better outcomes for both workers and companies.
Now, what we haven't really spoken about so far is the geography, where a lot of this growth has been happening. Because in some senses, the story of growing employment in the energy sector has been driven by emerging economies.
So it's clear that China has been a major engine of growth in the power sector over recent years, and it remains a global hub for energy manufacturing jobs. That said, some of the fastest growth in 2024 actually came from emerging market and developing economies. Places like India, Indonesia, and the Middle East all saw stronger growth year on year than China or most advanced economies, and that reflects their role as rapidly growing centers of global energy demand. The bulk of energy jobs in these economies remain in fuel supply, but they're also seeing a strong push towards electrification and increasing demand for workers in the power sector.
Okay, now I think it would feel a little bit strange in this podcast if we didn't touch on AI, artificial intelligence. But what can we say about how it's impacting the energy jobs market right now and potentially how that could change in future as well?
AI is starting to show up as a real productivity tool, but it's important to be clear about what it can and can't do. Right now, it doesn't really ease the acute shortages in hands-on technical roles that the energy sector depends on. Where companies see the biggest potential gains from AI is over the longer term, especially in administrative work and system performance, and we're already seeing early applications helping to streamline permitting, improve safety, and support training, including through tools like virtual reality. At the same time, the energy sector is still playing a bit of catch-up. Energy companies have fewer AI-skilled workers than sectors like technology, finance, education, or media, roughly 40% lower by comparison. And while investment in AI skills is rising, the reality is that today AI use cases don't significantly reduce the need for people on construction site, but also in operations or in maintenance.
Okay, as a final question, let's maybe end on an optimistic note, if there is one. So what are some of the reasons for optimism that some of these issues that have been flagged in this podcast about skills gap, why do we feel optimistic that they might be able to be filled?
Well, there are definitely reasons to feel optimistic. I promise it's not all doom and gloom. We've identified great examples from across the world where stakeholders have come together to find solutions to address skills gaps in the energy sector. So, for example, in South Africa, their Energy Skills Roadmap brings together different experts to monitor the labour market and to map out skills needs, a simple but very important first step. And there are examples of financial support for training. So in Canada, you have their Sustainable Jobs Training Fund, and in Denmark, there's wage compensation for those who don't want to lose out on wages, where there may be reskilling or upskilling. And I think reskilling programs is another area where we can be optimistic. And we've seen examples of reskilling programs for transitioning workers everywhere from Australia, Spain to Chile, that have helped keep energy workers in the sector while also addressing the skilled labour gap. And I think it's important to stress that this training, these solutions can exist in many forms and at different scales. So national level, huge large-scale initiatives, all the way down to community initiatives run by NGOs, for example, solar training in Myanmar, which is really important for energy access, work by NGOs in Malaysia, specifically with indigenous groups. So there really is no one size fits all. There's definitely solutions and tools that are out there, but what is clear is that people need to work together. We need this, what we call a multi-stakeholder approach, and definite good planning and adequate support is vital.
Okay, well, Elspeth Hathaway and Rebecca Ruff, thanks very much for talking to me today.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.